Hello and welcome to the second episode of Power Personality series. I'm still under the spell of my interview with my first guest, Rajesh Sethi, and I've been saying that ever since I spoke to him that my conversation with Rajesh is my life's most precious conversation yet. And I'm about to have yet another precious conversation with someone who is a rare entrepreneur who has disrupted his favorite industry, hospitality, and not once but twice. At the age of 26, the founder of Joy de Vivre Hospitality took an inner city motel and turned it into the second largest boutique hotel brand in America. This guest has written several New York Times bestseller books. Inspired by the work of famed psychologist Maslow and Frankl, his books Peak and Emotional Equations share his theories on transformation and meaning in business and life. His new book, Wisdom at Work: The Making of a Modern Elder, was inspired by his post 50-year-old experiences as both a mentor and unexpected internship at Airbnb. He was the CEO of his innovative company for 24 years and sold it in 2010. He accepted an invitation in 2013 from the young founders of Airbnb to help transform their promising home sharing startup into what is today the world's largest hospitality brand. In 4 years as head of global hospitality and strategy, he taught his award-winning methods to hosts in close to 200 countries. Today, he serves as the company's strategic advisor for hospitality and leadership. He also founded Fest 300 to share his love of travel and festivals. And in January 2018, he founded Modern Elder Academy, the world's first midlife wisdom school, where attendees learn how to repurpose a lifetime of experience for the modern workplace. He is a recipient of hospitality's highest honor, the Pioneer Award, and was named the most innovative CEO in the San Francisco Bay Area by the San Francisco Business Times. He holds a BA and MBA from Stanford University and an honorary doctorate in psychology from Saybrook University. He serves on the boards of the Burning Man Project and the Esalen Institute, home of the Conley Library. Please welcome the man behind all these stupendous accomplishments, Chip Conley. Hello, Chip. Welcome to Goals Driven Life channel. How are you doing today?
I'm glad to be with you, Ravi. Thank you.
And may I ask, since you have, I think, multiple residences, where are you dialing in from today?
I'm in San Francisco today, so it's a gorgeous day in San Francisco.
Excellent. Yeah, it's quite cloudy today here in Germany, and I'm speaking to you. It's 5:30 p.m. It's fall time now. The summer has ended here in Germany. So, and you're my second guest on my channel. First was Rajesh, and Rajesh connected me to you. And there's a reason why he connected me, and I'll let you know. So at Goals Driven Life, we interview successful people who have intentionally designed their lives and have been able to marry success and purpose and meaning together. And we want to learn them how they do it. And you sit right at the top of the examples who are operating at that intersection. Now, for us, there are many kinds of success, right? So one could build an empire and build a lot of wealth. One could be winning admiration and respect from people in their field or community. It could also mean self-respect. That is also success of its kind. And I would consider you to have accomplished all of that. So you built an empire. You led a life with a lot of purpose and meaning. You have written a lot of meaningful books that have created a lot of impact. You are respected by the world. You are heard and read as a thoughtful speaker and writer. So that's a lot of achievements and a very well-rounded and balanced success, and therefore an ideal kind, so to say. So for all those who are listening to this and want to envision and design a life similar to you, my questions today would be on three broad themes I can categorize your life into. The first is attaining. I took the word from your books, as you yourself have said, wealth creation through businesses. And second would be leading a life of meaning and purpose. And third would be your intellectual pursuits like books, your retreats, etc. So
Let me begin with my first question. So, you said in your book that when someone asks, "What do you do?" answer not with your profession, job title, or company. Tell them what creates meaning for you. This gives people a window into your occupational soul. So, allow me to ask you the same question. What do you do these days?
Great first question. Thank you, Ravi. I guess I am in the business of helping people make aging aspirational again. Um, there was a time, I think, in past centuries when there was a sense that moving from adulthood to elderhood was something you looked forward to. Today, we absolutely look forward to moving from childhood to adulthood, but not many of us look forward to moving from adulthood to elderhood. Now, in certain cultures like India and a few others, there still is a reverence for elders. But I think what I'm trying to help shift is this idea that I don't think reverence is the place where the modern society thinks of its elders. I think the key with a modern society is to think of their elders as not just reverent but also relevant. And so, to me, helping people move into midlife and later life and still be open to learning and being curious, such that you could actually take your timeless wisdom and apply it in modern day contexts. That's really what I'm doing today.
Excellent. I will have a question on this. Maybe you could shed some examples, living examples on some people who are past 60, say, and are still relevant. So that will be a question later. Let's start from the very beginning. So let's start with life vision, because I believe that's how you live an intentional life and design a life that you want. So at 26, we have all heard about your story starting 26. At 26, when you began, did you envision the kind of life you wanted to lead, or the kind of successes you wanted to achieve? Or did a lot of that vision evolve as you were growing in different phases of your life?
Well, it's a great question, because I do think if you're going to be an entrepreneur in life, it's really important to ask yourself, what is leading you to being the entrepreneur? And I can tell you, back when I was 26, the two things that actually were influencing why I wanted to be an entrepreneur were I wanted creativity and I wanted freedom. And those two things were sort of fundamental to why I decided to create my boutique hotel company, Joie de Vivre. The thing that was interesting is, by identifying those two things, those two qualities I wanted in my life, about over 20 years later, when my company was much larger, but it was also struggling during the Great Recession, I asked myself, do I still have creativity and freedom? And the answer was no, I actually don't. I don't feel any creativity or freedom in what I'm doing. And that was when I realized, wow, I had deviated quite far from what I originally aspired to. So what I would just say is, I do think that it's possible that someone's interests and reasons for doing what they do can evolve over time. But I also think some of the core reasons of why we do what we do are there for a lifetime. And so when I realized I didn't have a lot of creativity or freedom anymore, I realized it was time to sell my business and to try something new. And so that's what I did. So I can say that I knew that I wanted the company to be a role model for culture and for being a conscious capitalist. And I say that because the name Joie de Vivre in the United States was not a practical name. Joie de Vivre, if you're in Europe, so you probably know that Joie de Vivre means joy of life in French.
Yeah.
But in the United States, people don't know how to spell Joie de Vivre. They don't know what it means. They don't know how to pronounce it. And so it was a risky name for me to use that name as our name for the company, for a new company. But what I loved about it is the name of the company was also the mission of the company. Joie de Vivre means joy of life. And our mission was to create joy, first for our employees, second for our customers, in that order. And as such, in some ways, one of the things that was very clear to me from the very start, and was true the whole time during the 24 years that I ran the company, was we were a mission-led company, and our culture was all about creating joy, and that was infused into how we operated, how we marketed, and how we lived our lives.
Got it. You mentioned creativity and freedom. What did freedom mean to you at that age?
Freedom meant the ability to try things on my own without having to ask for permission. Having worked in other companies where some of them are quite hierarchical, like Morgan Stanley, the investment bank, and others very entrepreneurial real estate development companies. In these companies, generally speaking, you didn't have a lot of permission. You had to get approval to do just about anything. And I liked the freedom of having an idea and exploring it and having the risk of failure and putting together a team to see if we can make it work. And that, for me, that's what freedom meant. It meant not having to answer to someone else.
So do you think, from your experience, being an entrepreneur is the sure shot way to experience freedom, or you think maybe running a company could actually cripple your freedom sometimes?
I think it can. I mean, as I said, 24 years later, did I have a lot of freedom? No, I didn't. So if freedom is what you're looking for, being an entrepreneur is one path you could take. There's a lot of paths you could take. Freedom from being an artist could be a form of being having freedom. Being a soul seeker, someone who's on a spiritual path, could be a form of freedom. So there's all kinds of different ways you could actually experience freedom.
Got it. So I'm very curious to know how your life has evolved in decades. I'm sure you remember what kind of person you were in your 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. So could you help us understand what kind of person were you in your 20s and then 30s, 40s, and 50s, and
sure,
maybe influences that led you to become who you were at that stage?
I think in my 20s, I was very curious. I was very, and a little confused too. I wasn't sure what the right path was for me. I went to Stanford undergrad, and then I went to Stanford Business School, very prestigious business school. I went straight in very young. And so in many ways, I was on a very traditional path. And yet what I really wanted to do was non-traditional. And ultimately creating a boutique hotel company at age 26 with no hotel background was a non-traditional path. So I think in my 20s, I was really trying to understand myself more. So I'd say the influences on me were self-awareness and going to workshops. And I was in therapy. I was in psychological therapy, trying to understand myself better. So my 20s was, I think, an era where I was very internal. And then as I moved into my 30s, I was now a leader. And I had a company, and that company grew quite a bit during my 30s. At the end of my 30s, I wrote my first book, The Rebel Rules, Daring to Be Yourself in Business. So I think that, my 30s were a period where I moved from self-awareness to, and being very internal, to actually being external. And external as a leader, external as sort of the icon for the company, as a speaker, as a writer. And so it was a period where I moved out of any introversion I had to more of an extroversion side. And I learned the power of what does it mean to be a leader. So I really studied leadership. My 40s was my darkest decade. It's the decade I had the biggest challenge. Because in my 40s, we experienced in my company both the dot-com bust and the Great Recession. And we were based in San Francisco, and all of our hotels were in California. We were the second largest boutique hotelier in the U.S. But the vast majority of our hotels were in Northern California, in Silicon Valley and San Francisco. And the dot-com bust was awful for that region. We actually did quite well during that period, which is shocking. It led me to writing my third book, which is called Peak. But I think during that period, my 40s was a period where I went internal again. So 30s was about leadership. 40s was about external leadership, but understanding your emotions. So I think that leaders, in my 30s, I don't think I would ever have said leaders are the emotional thermostats of those they lead, which basically means a leader sets the climate control in a room, and they influence with their emotions how everybody else is feeling. I didn't think of that in my 30s. I thought much more traditional leadership, which was like, okay, what's the business plan, and how are we going to raise money, and how are we going to market, etc. But in my 40s, I think I really saw the power of emotion. So in some ways, my 40s was the combination of my 20s and my 30s. My 20s was my own personal internal journey, self-awareness. It was a very emotional journey, I would say, in terms of learning who I was. My 30s being very external leadership. So in my 40s, I sort of combined those two. And some of the influences in that decade were very much about EQ, emotional intelligence, Daniel Goleman's work, and his book about that subject, which popularized the idea of the importance of EQ in leadership. And then now I'm in my 50s. I've been in my 50s. I turned 59 at the end of October. So I'm getting close to the end of my 50s. Actually, my 50s have been my favorite decade, strangely. Who would have guessed? Because my 50s have been a decade where I completely remade myself. So for 24 years, from 26 till 49, I ran a company that I founded. And then I sold it at the bottom of the Great Recession. And then I ended up in my 50s being asked by the three founders of Airbnb to help come in and help them guide their rocket ship. It was a very small company. It was a tech company. It didn't really have much of a hospitality reputation at that time. That was 7 years ago. So when I was 52, I joined Airbnb. And so I think my 50s have been an era where I realized, my gosh, in midlife, you can remake yourself. You can repurpose yourself. You can mine your mastery, and you can learn that you have wisdom inside of yourself that can be very applicable to other people. So, so that's who knows what the 60s will be like. But I can say, for those of you who are younger, which includes you, Ravi, is that I think that there's a lot of evidence that says that around 45 years old, 40 to 50, people have a struggle. It's a tough decade for a lot of people, and then somehow they hit the bottom of that U curve of happiness, and things get better from there. And generally, people are happier in their 50s, and even happier in their 60s, and often happier in their 70s than either of those prior two decades. So it's not, once you hit 40, it's not all downhill from there. A lot of times people think that, and I've learned that it's not the case.
Noted. No, I do not have any research, but it's just an assumption that you have all your goals, aspirational goals, when you are young. And if you have been successful as you are, then it's fine. You can actually repurpose yourself for newer missions in life. But if you have not been successful in your early years, and you have not been successful in your 30s, and you're approaching 40s, and you still want to be successful commercially and making money, and that's what my next question would be. There would be a sense of dissatisfaction settling down, and also the feeling of losing your prime, and you have not succeeded, right?
There's a
Yes, you have been lucky because you experienced your success in your 20s and 30s, right? So how do you answer that?
Well, there's an emotional equation I wrote about in my book, Emotional Equations, called disappointment equals expectations minus reality. And I think your 40s is the decade when that kicks in, meaning it's the decade when expectations have to be reconsidered. Because, we grow up and we're sort of infused with a lot of expectations by society, by our parents, by other people in our lives, by ourselves. And then it's about, in our 40s when we start to realize, oh, shoot, I'm not going to be the president of the United States.
Yes, exactly.
And so I think the process of modifying expectations helps address that equation. Now, there's one of two ways to solve the disappointment. Either you reduce your expectations or change them, or you improve the reality. And there's some people I know who just step up hard and get more encouraged, more enthusiastic, and maybe even more obsessed about trying to improve the reality to meet those expectations. But that can be. I mean, I admire people like that. I certainly fit that profile moderately well. But I also know that happiness and success are not the same thing.
I see.
And trying to actually meet expectations in order to feel successful, in order to lead to happiness, is an equation that often doesn't work. What does work pretty well is happiness leads to success. I think that's more true than success leads to happiness. So knowing that, just being on the treadmill, continuing to run, looking for those things that you haven't accomplished yet, as soon as you accomplish them, they're in your hand and they have less value than they did when you hadn't accomplished them yet. So now you want to go out and get the next thing. This is why in the United States we call this the pursuit of happiness. Now, the word pursuit actually means to chase with hostility. So think about that. As a culture, we pursue happiness, but that means we actually go after this thing, happiness, often chasing it with hostility. That mentality is not well versed in what it means to be happy. It is very well versed in what it means to achieve and attain and all of that. We'll get to this later in the conversation. But I think it's a really important point because as people are younger, really getting clear on what it is that's most important to you and focusing on that and not listening to everybody else about what they think you should be doing is really critical.
Got it. So my next question is again we are at 25 still. A lot of 25-year-old would be listening to this. What would you do differently if you were 25 in today's world? Right? Not your 25, but today's world. I'm not asking for specific business ideas if you want to be an entrepreneur, but what kind of mindset and attitude and approaches to life that would be more suitable in today's time? And I ask you specifically because you have worked with some young CEOs at Airbnb, you have worked with them closely, you have worked with younger talent maybe who have driven Airbnb to success. So what do you think is the right mindset for today's world?
So you use the word mindset, and I'll use that to sort of answer this. There's Carol Dweck is a psychologist at Stanford who's shown that there's the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset. If I was 25, I would love to have learned that such that I would know, okay, how do I identify when I'm in a fixed mindset? A fixed mindset tends to be you're constantly trying to prove yourself, and your definition of success is winning. So this means that you actually don't necessarily try things that you can't win. So that means the sandbox you play in is relatively small because you only want to do things that you can win. On the other hand, a growth mindset means that success is not winning, it's learning. And you're not trying to prove yourself, you're trying to improve yourself. And that premise that I, at age 25, would like to just be constantly improving myself is a beautiful lesson for everyone who's listening. Because if you, at age 25, are only focusing on what you do well already, you're not actually building, strength and skills in areas that you could use at age 35 that you build over the next 10 years. So I would just say that the lesson I would have there is that developing a growth mindset as early in your life as possible allows you to grow as a human. And that usually has a profound effect on your sense of happiness.
Got it. For all the youngsters who are, again, they're chasing wealth creation maybe because they want to be entrepreneurs, they want to be super successful, maybe they want to own 50 hotels like you. What do you think are the kinds of attitudes and skills and way of life would set them to a course of wealth making? I'm still at attaining, so if you could answer that.
Yeah. Well, I think if we're talking about financial wealth, let's recognize that there's lots of kinds of wealth. There's physical wealth in terms of your body. There is emotional wealth. Wealth could also be called health. But let's talk about financial wealth, which is the wealth that you asked about. I mean, I think the key I learned from Richard Branson from Virgin a long time ago. He wrote the foreword for my first book. Him, well, whenever I'm starting a new business, because Virgin had so many different businesses, he said, I ask myself the question, am I going to fall in love with this product or service? And he said the mantra over and over again, I am the market, I am the market, I am the market. And what does that mean? It means if you're going to be an entrepreneur, or if you're going to go out and try to build businesses that you fall in love with. Build businesses that you as a customer would be incredibly evangelical about, meaning you just would go out and tell the world about it. Why is that? Well, first of all, it's a lot more fun to focus on a business that's interesting to you. Number two is, if that's how you're thinking, you're going to dream about this business. When you're taking a shower, you're going to think about this business. You will know the high standard that you're trying to live up to, which is your own customer standard of what you want this business to offer. You'll have a more intuitive sense of what works and what doesn't. So I guess my summary would be, don't go out and try to create a business that is in an industry or trying to do something as a value proposition that doesn't matter a lot to you. Or you're doing it for practical reasons. You say, oh, I'm going to get into Bitcoin. I'm getting into Bitcoin because Bitcoin's going to be big. And everybody tells me that. No. If Bitcoin and currency and the idea of radically changing the financial system is interesting to you, and you have a real intuitive gut about it, and you love it, then fine. Bitcoin could be perfect. But don't go to be in Bitcoin just because it's the flavor of the month of what people are saying is the thing that you should do.
Got it. So I think this was also key for your success, because you passionately felt to radically change the hospitality industry.
Yes.
And even it was difficult occasionally, you went through all of that difficulties because you are passionate about it. So you can go through rough times if you're really passionate about it, but if you're not passionate and you're just chasing the trend, then the rough times would be really rough for you too.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, is that when the rough times come, if you don't enjoy the business industry and don't have just a genuine love of what you're trying to do, it's very easy to get distracted by something else.
Got it. Excellent. Yeah, so you mentioned in an interview with Tom Bellew, I listened to your interview there, very interesting one, that the first half of your life is accumulating and the second half is about editing. And then somewhere you mentioned first half is about being interesting, second half is being interested, first half is being find your gift, second half is to give away. I absolutely love the way you have distinguished the two halves of the life.
You must be an accountant. it's like a ledger of assets and liabilities. I'm kidding, Ravi.
So I picked this from your statements in various interviews and I think books also. But when you say that first and second half, what is the transition age for you? And then not everybody is able to buy a motel in 26, and therefore attaining and accumulating sometimes takes place well into their 40s, because maybe they have been slow to experience success. So would your definition of attaining and then giving it away still applicable to them? And how about people who build businesses in their 50s or maybe 60s, like Colonel Sanders, who started KFC in 67, and one of my ex-CEOs, I worked with Autodesk before, so one of the senior vice president, he must be in his, again, mid-50s. He started another company in his mid-50s. So could you reconcile both of these concepts?
Sure. So, first of all, what's the age of midlife? Midlife used to be 45 to 65, so you could say like the right center of midlife would be 55, but I actually believe midlife is 35 to 75. I think that people are feeling sometimes irrelevant younger in certain industries, and therefore they're in midlife earlier. And I think because we're going to live longer, more and more people are going to work by choice or necessity past 65, which is the traditional retirement age in many places, although in some places the retirement age is younger than that. So, what does that mean? Okay, if the first half of life is accumulating, the second half is editing. When's the halfway point? It could be somewhere between 35 and 75. I think it depends on the person. I like the fact that gives a lot of flexibility. I don't think there's an exact age. I don't think at age 50, it's all of a sudden, okay, it's now the second half and my life is going to change overnight. No, this is not like an on-off switch. This is like a dimmer. It sort of changes with time. So let's talk a little bit more about, okay, what happens during this time? Well, earlier we talked about disappointment equals expectations minus reality. And we realized that, okay, there's a point in your 40s often when you realize that some of the things that you expected were going to happen haven't happened the way you wanted them to. You have one of two choices. Either you can try to go out and change the reality, which is fine, or you can start to shift your expectations. That is the first step toward what I call the great midlife edit. And the great midlife edit is when you start to define in midlife what really is most important to you. So the idea of accumulating in the first half of your life is you accumulate knowledge, you accumulate friends, jobs, a resume, wealth, things, maybe a romantic relationship, maybe children, responsibilities, various identities. My God, by the time you're 45, that's like a lot. That is a whole lot to be holding on to. So if midlife is now 40 years long, not 20 years long, it's a marathon. If you are carrying a lot of baggage on the marathon, you're going to get tired pretty quickly. So my premise is the first half, whenever that period is a period of accumulating. And then the second half is when you start to realize what's most important to you. Now, to answer your question about success and whether someone's actually had success, you could make an argument that the earlier you have success, the faster you can move into editing mode. There's an argument to be made for that. There's all kinds of people who fit that profile, and they go and live a much more spacious life after that. And then there's a bunch of other people who don't fit that profile at all because they're just constant doers and attainers, and they're going to go and they feel like, okay, I've gotten that success, now I want my next success. Yes. I'm a combination of both. I'm probably more this latter example though. I go back and do the next success. But what I will say is that the idea of going from accumulating to editing is not necessarily about just career success. It's truly about if you're running the marathon and you're carrying all of those things I mentioned earlier, like responsibilities and friendships and knowledge, if you're just accumulating all of that and not figuring out how to edit it, you're going to get tired. And so at some point, you have to start saying what's most important to me, who's most important to me, etc. And that's when I think people make some really good decisions. This is also a time, the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs in the United States today are people 50 and older.
Is it?
Exactly. So when I say editing, I'm not saying you're just editing and you're just going to live on a golf course and play golf.
Right.
Editing may mean I'm going to edit my traditional responsibilities and the things I've done and my corporate job, and I'm going to actually start something new. And I've accumulated a lot of responsibilities, and maybe even I've accumulated a lot of wisdom. I am now going to have the freedom to apply that wisdom to my own career and to my own business. And so, yeah, don't think that editing by itself means that a person is just retiring or just going to live a leisurely life. Right. It's frankly actually meaning, okay, the things that don't work for me, the things I'm tired of, the things I don't want to have in my life anymore. Right. And it's not just freedom from, It's freedom to. Freedom from basically means you're doing your best to actually run away from something. Freedom to means you have the freedom to do something that you want to do.
Right. All right. Thank you. Just that you from California and you have working closely with successful entrepreneurs. What do you see is what are your thoughts around what separates the successful entrepreneurs, especially in Silicon Valley, than the non-successful? I mean, what separates them from the rest?
I mean, I think it's hard to generalize here, but I would say some of the qualities of the successful entrepreneurs are the following. I think generally, there's no doubt a great idea or business plan is helpful. That alone, I don't think does it, but I think having a really smart business plan that is new and pioneering is great. And then you have to execute on it. So you better be a good executor, or you better be good at creating a team and a culture that is a magnet for great people. And then you better be pretty good at learning out how to execute. So, I mean, sometimes people are visionary, but they can't execute. So if you're that kind of person, make sure you find a good chief operating officer who's an executor. Being able to raise money is important, but I would say it's of the three things I said so far, I think it's the least important of the three. Raising money is hard if you've never done it before, and many people think that the reason that they were not successful is because they couldn't raise money. But I would say often the reason they weren't successful was not because they couldn't raise money. It was because maybe the business plan wasn't compelling enough. Or the fourth quality that I'm going to talk about, maybe they weren't persistent enough. There's persistent and grit, Grit. When someone actually has persistence and grit, it means they don't give up easily. The three founders of Airbnb had persistence and grit. This was not an idea that the investment market, naturally gravitated to. They were very lucky to be included in the Y Combinator program, but they were sort of like a last-minute addition. And so for the first 2 years of the business, it was barely getting by. It was not going to succeed. Urban home sharing, as we know it today, was not going to happen. And they had persistence and grit, and that, I think, got them somewhere. So I would say that's a fourth quality. I mean, I think I could keep going, but I think, so far I think I've said 4 key qualities that influence, whether someone's successful or not.